I won't spend time talking too much about myself, except just to say that I've worked in clean energy for almost 30 years. I've worked as a project engineer in all different kinds of renewable energy, probably most anything you could name. I've worked on a project in that technology in some way. I have done a lot of research in various technologies. I never really go diving into a particular type of technology until I've really looked at the large-scale market and resources that are available for that technology, and I have to really believe in it before I really devote myself to working on some new technology. But I've a number of my projects over the years have been featured in various magazines and podcasts, and even in a textbook on energy law. And so for the last 12 years, I've worked at the Colorado Department of Agriculture managing a grant program, helping farmers and ranchers do all kinds of renewable energy, and I provide technical assistance on those projects too. And sometimes I'm even out in the field turning wrenches and so forth on some of those projects. But these are tricky projects, and farmers don't want to they don't want to interrupt their 18-hour days to be distracted by a project that maybe they don't understand very well, but they know it's important to them. And those projects can easily get stalled. And so I've specialized in keeping those projects moving forward and even jumping in to do the work necessary to move those projects forward. I took a skill set test one time years ago, and it said I am an activator, and that's always how I've thought of myself. But I also am very proud of being a public servant, and I feel that's a respectable position to be in, and I really value that. It's very rewarding to me. So tonight I gave Martin a choice of about 4 completely different topics to talk about, and he thought this one would be a good one. So let me start. How many of you have heard of agrivoltaics before? Almost everybody. That's a lot. Great. So it's a kind of a hot topic right now. There's I don't want to say it's kind of a fad right now, but I think it really has caught on, and it's got a lot of movement behind it, but it has some challenges too that I want to talk about. So I want to start out by pointing out that farmers are the original solar energy professionals. They are the ones who have forever, as long as we've done agriculture, they've been harvesting sunlight and converting it into chemical energy that we need for our bodies. And what would we do without agriculture? We would all still be hunters and gatherers, and that wouldn't really give us much opportunity to do all the wonderful things, to live in the houses we do, drive the cars we do, have these kinds of meetings on devices like this in a room like this. So without agriculture, we would still not be much more than the humans have been for most of their 300,000 years of existence. It's only in the last 10 or 11,000 years that we've been producing our food through agriculture. This requires a lot of land, almost 1.2 billion acres in the United States. That's 52%, almost 53% of the U.S. land area. Now, I will say, to qualify this, a lot of that is rangeland. So that's not necessarily, we're not just talking about cropland. We're talking about a lot of huge open spaces where if you travel 60 miles that way on the other side of this rangeland, you'll find the cattle that roam across that whole huge expanse. And so, I just had to quantify that a little bit and make that clear. Now, solar energy also can be very land intensive, but we're talking about 10 to 14 million acres of land to supply 100% of our needs for this country, conceptually, at least to produce as much energy as we consume here. Figuring out how to time it right so that the supply matches the demand is another issue. But, and that data, so originally in 2004, my source said it's 10 million acres. Some more recent sources say about 14 million. But compared to 1.2 billion acres for agriculture, that's a tiny segment. So it's a big opportunity. So this is kind of an ad hoc definition of agrivoltaics that I put up here. So it's the integration and kind of almost the synthesis of solar with agriculture, where you are producing some kind of agricultural product, whether it's livestock or crops, on the same footprint as the photovoltaics. And I take a much more strict interpretation of what agrivoltaics is than some of the experts, and even some people at NREL might say that I'm a little bit too strict on that. But, and so in some ways, farmers harvest sunlight and turn it into food. So agrivoltaics allows them to harvest sunlight and turn it into electricity. So I think of it as like photon farming. In a way, I kind of prefer that to agrivoltaics because it really puts the farm into that, and it also emphasizes where that energy is coming from. We're talking about energy direct from the sun, turning directly into food and electricity, and there's nothing in between. There's no evaporation that falls down the mountain and generates hydropower, or some coal that's been produced through photosynthesis and then buried under the earth for 180 million years. None of that in between. It's just direct from sunlight to energy. So it's synergistic. I'll talk a little bit about how agrivoltaics actually improves or can improve agricultural yields, whether you're talking about animals or crops. But I really want to emphasize throughout this talk the dual land use. I'm going to really try to hammer that on through this presentation. We're not talking about rooftop solar. We're not talking about a few different things, because rooftop was the original dual land use. You're putting it on a building. You're not really doing anything else on the roof of a building, usually. So that rooftop is just unused available space. What better use is it than generating electricity? There are a couple of other similar ideas, too, that sometimes get grouped in with agrivoltaics, like ecovoltaics and aquavoltaics. Photovoltaics is kind of a new one. So I'll go through show you some examples of what that looks like. So here's ecovoltaics. So it's all about ecosystem services, and especially pollinator habitat. And what's nice is it kind of stays true to the totally passive nature of solar. You're letting the wild plants grow what some might think are weeds, but they're weeds that the butterflies and the bees love to visit, and so that they can continue generating their food. Photovoltaics. So this is up in Walden, Colorado, I believe. It's a retention pond at a facility. I don't remember if it's a settling pond or like some water for an industrial process. But these solar panels are floating on water. You wouldn't think that you would want to put a large quantity of a solar generating plant on water, but that's how it works. And it's a great idea because, especially if that's water for drinking, evaporation at our higher altitude and intense sun evaporates a lot of that water. And that is one way in our very arid environment that we can help conserve water to significant degrees. We can also do the same thing by putting it above canals. This picture might be in India. The source that I got this from didn't say anything about this picture. But I know there are some, India has really put a lot of money into doing these projects across the country. So the rest of the pictures are just all varieties of agrivoltaics projects. So here's kind of an interesting one where maybe when the afternoon sun gets more intense and these hoop houses, greenhouses, get extra hot, these provide some shading and keep those cool so that they don't have to ventilate these hoop houses just to keep their plants from becoming too heat stressed. So a very clever use of agrivoltaics. Here's Byron Komanek at Jack's Solar Garden in near Loveland. How many of you have been there before? A few of you. 4? Okay, good. So that particular day, he had some sheep on the under the array. He's had, I think he has cattle come out for a day or so, fairly regularly now. Not too often, but so here's another example. This is in Germany. An interesting way of doing vertically oriented panels. So the morning sun shades the east, or illuminates and generates electricity on the east side of these dual-faced solar panels. And then as the sun moves across the sky, it illuminates the other side and generates energy from the other side of those same panels. This is a very large greenhouse where about half of the roof structure is made of solar panels rather than glass. And I wouldn't be surprised if this greenhouse is owned by the same company that owns the largest greenhouse in Colorado, down near the town of Peyton, east of Colorado Springs or Monument. It's 1.5 million square feet of growing flowers for Mother's Day and plants like poinsettias for Christmas and all that. So a massive facility, and just like this one, they have all glass instead of like the polycarbonate glazing on the greenhouse. Now this one, this one gets a lot of press. It's an interesting project, a demonstration project that the Department of Ag has provided some funding for. So it's a windbreak. And these, instead of having just wooden slats along there, they installed solar panels. But it's got a couple of issues. One issue is typically, what I think is a flaw of this concept is that you don't put these windbreaks near buildings, near structures of any kind. They're typically, the reason you have a windbreak is because it's far away from any kind of structure, and that probably means it's far away from any grid connection too. So these are going to be off-grid, and you can't really do off-grid without a lot of expensive batteries. And so how are you going to do these on a significant scale at cost? So this isn't grid-tied. All the energy it generates just runs a little PC that's used for some data mining, basically. And so is that really agrivoltaics? I don't know. This is where I have some disagreements with some other people who work in this field, where they love this idea, and I think it's got some major flaws, and I just don't believe in it. So this is not agrivoltaics. It's on a farm. It's generating power to run an irrigation pump. 75 horsepower is a fairly sizable pump. But it's just conventional solar on dirt. It's not on any kind of soil, and it's behind a fence. So it's kind of sequestered. It's not really doing anything except generating on-site energy. But I don't consider that agrivoltaics. Here's another one. So we funded this project. This was one that I funded through my program a couple years ago. This is 1/3 of a 600 kilowatt solar array on a dairy east of Greeley. But it's just out in the middle of a gravel lot. So it looks like my alignment got off there a little bit. So this dairy, it's saving them around $80,000 a year on this 600 kilowatt array. That's a significant amount, and I got to tell you, dairies are really struggling because the commodity prices for milk are terrible, and they have been for a long time. So anything we can do to help dairies is great. All right, so there's my introduction. This is kind of my agenda. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some techno-socioeconomic analysis and framework around agrivoltaics. And I hope not to offend any of you, but I'm going to get a little bit, just talk briefly about religion and a little bit of politics. So we all know that politics are not too pleasant right now, as we've talked about. A little bit of statistics and stuff here. And I'm going to talk about some of the problems that I see with the status of agrivoltaics and how it's being done right now. And I'm going to give you my vision for how we can make it work better in a way that really serves everybody and not the elite few that own these massive solar farms that are $20 or $100 million solar projects. I'm hoping that we can figure out a way to take advantage of the true benefits of solar that benefits all of society, all of us, on a more distributed, more democratic scale. And I have a little theme song. I don't know how this will work, but let's just have fun and we'll try it. But is it picking it up? So the idea here, I think if Joni Mitchell lived today, she wouldn't be talking about paving paradise with a parking lot. She might be talking about paving paradise with solar farms. So it's been a little crazy, in my opinion. So I'm going to go back to just kind of give you a snapshot for what things look like in Colorado. So we're talking about energy as food and energy as electricity. We need electricity, we need power for our modern society, and I'll go into that a little bit more, but if we lost that, we could still survive as long as we can eat. But if we can't eat, it all goes away. So little snapshot of Colorado, $9.2 billion in farm sales in 2022, which was the latest ag census. They do a census every 10 years. In Colorado, that's a $47 billion a year economic impact. So that puts us at the number two largest economic sector in the state. Anyone know what number one is? Tourism, yes. It's all about the outdoors, skiing, hunting, all that stuff. So the numbers are pretty amazing when you consider there's 5.8 million people by the last statistic I saw in Colorado. Well, that's about how many chickens and cows there are also when you put those together. And then you add hogs and a few other things. There's a lot of livestock. By cash, cows are definitely, we're still Denver isn't exactly a cow town, but we are a cow state for sure. In fact, I'll say that the highest density of cattle production in the entire world is in northeastern Colorado, southwestern Nebraska, and that northwestern part of Kansas. And coincidentally, by necessity, that's the highest concentration of corn production in the world because you have to feed those cows. And so you grow the corn and the cows together in the same place. So, and it's not corn that we can eat. It's, you would not want, you probably couldn't even swallow it. It's called dent corn, and it's strictly for cows. So wheat and corn, I put those in tons of production instead of bushels because it's pretty hard for most people to have a concept of what a bushel is of something. So it's a lot, millions of tons of corn and wheat and hay. We grow almost 100 other agricultural commodities, but those are the three big crops in Colorado. And that's important when we talk about agrivoltaics. Also, at the bottom there, Colorado is number one in losing. We're winning that losing farmland. A lot of that is because farmers are just going out of business. Over the last few years, it's been especially bad. And so we lost 1.6 million acres of farmland in the 5-year period from 2017 to 2022. Normally, when a farmer goes out of business, the big corporations buy up all that land, but they've been going out of business faster than the corporations can keep up and buy up their land. So a lot of that land is in the hands of banks right now, and they don't want it. They're not farmers. They don't know what to do with it. That land is just, it's not, even when land is fallow, it still is cultivated. It's still taken care of. When land is abandoned, it becomes degraded pretty quickly when it's agricultural land. It's not a good thing. So I also want to point out that about 75 to 80% of all the land, or all the water that's diverted in the whole state goes to agriculture. It's mind-boggling to imagine how much. Direct energy costs, not a lot. When you consider that agriculture is the second largest economic sector, $400 million a year in energy costs is really very small. So almost half of that goes to pumping water. The most energy-intensive enterprises in agriculture, besides irrigation, are dairies and greenhouses. That greenhouse I mentioned, 1.5 million square feet, do you remember the big cold spell we had a few years ago? About 3 years ago, it was it got down to 20 below in this area, and it was below 10 degrees for almost a week, I think. They spent $3 million in 1 week heating that greenhouse to keep their Mother's Day flowers that were sprouting alive. And so that in 1 week they spent $3 million. Normally they spend about $1 million a month keeping that greenhouse heated. So on the energy side, energy is pretty remarkable in Colorado that we are absolutely replete with all of these energy resources in a phenomenal way. When you consider how much oil resources there are and the natural gas and the coal, most of the coal that was sent to the East Coast all came from Colorado because we have the cleanest coal in the country. And so it was more valuable to ship it to New England than to burn it at home, just because they have so many problems with the acid rain. And the cleaner coal in Colorado, far cleaner than the Wyoming coal, would all go there. We are also very blessed with wind and solar, hydropower, and geothermal to a remarkable degree. And so when you add all that together, we stand above all the other states in our energy resources. And I just want to drive home this issue that, our economy, our society can only grow as big as the commerce that we can sustain. So if we consider commerce to be like the lifeblood, what drives that commerce? It's energy that makes it all possible. Energy is the heart that pumps that commerce through the system. So this is true whether we're talking about food as energy or electricity or whatever heats our homes and cools them and moves our cars. Now, I'm also going to make an outrageous claim that the economics of fossil fuels has permeated and dominated the cost of living in much the same way as the slavery-based economy permeated the cost of living in the Western Hemisphere between the 16th and the 19th centuries. Now, I'm not going to equate those in any way. I wouldn't dare do that, but I do just want to point out that also, like slavery, the fossil fuel-based economy is costly and burdensome, and it's an existential threat to us today. So, and I'll just add to kind of expand on this a little bit. So, to put it in a little bit more historical perspective, the Industrial Revolution occurred in two phases in the United States. So initially, there was the cotton gin and the steam engine and all that stuff. And so that started in the 1700s. And then the second Industrial Revolution occurred right after the Civil War. And that's known as the Technical Revolution. And almost since the beginning of the Technical Revolution, almost every commodity price has been deeply coupled to the price of petroleum, coal, and natural gas. I'll also, just to wrap that part up, mention that there's something that Bill McKibben, I've heard him talk about this idea several times, that communism failed because it neglected the basic needs of people. And he says that capitalism is failing because it neglects the basic needs of the environment. And I think that agrivoltaics is part of the transition to help us move past this failing stage of capitalism. So what I really like about solar, and maybe you've all recognized this yourselves, solar with storage is a technology that is simple to use, virtually plug and play in some cases. It's low impact with passive operation and no user inputs required when it's operating. It's scalable and it's distributed. Almost anyone can own and use it. Solar lends itself toward something beyond capitalism. So it can lend itself toward democratic socialism, which implies public ownership of the primary, like utilities and so forth, or whether it's public or like a cooperative ownership. I think that concept is important, but it also lends itself to social democracy. Social democracy, as opposed to democratic socialism, is still about private ownership on a distributed level, where everyone can be, can partake. Social democracy, like we have that new mayor in New York, he's a social democrat. So it's still capitalism, but with guardrails, the way capitalism was for much of the 20th century. Now, on the other hand, as we're witnessing right now, the Project 2025 manifesto, as we watch that unfold, we're witnessing the emergence of the true face of unfettered capitalism. About 100 years ago, this was given the name neoliberalism, but don't let that word liberal confuse you, because what they're talking about is being liberated from all of the guardrails of government oversight. That's unfettered capitalism. And as we've seen in times past, like in World War II, when you remove all of the guardrails of capitalism, what we see is that emerges together always with authoritarianism. Authoritarianism always emerges in some form when the guardrails of government oversight are removed from capitalism. Project 2025 is the culmination of 80 years of strategic planning and political influence by the wealthiest elites of the United States. And that's just we're witnessing right now what that looks like. And I think part of the answer to that could be agrivoltaics. And solar now, this is called Swanson's Law, that the PV module prices are dropping 20% for each doubling of installed capacity. But also, photovoltaics is lightning fast to install, to implement, compared to especially something like nuclear power, which can take 20 years to build a power plant. You can build a similar scale solar facility in 2 years. So it's a huge difference. There's no competition, really. And I don't want to be too gushy and like over the top about solar, because I think there are lots of other technologies that are really great too. But you know, there's all this momentum, and it's going to be really hard for this current administration to really make a dent in everything that's happening right now. So, as this all was happening, the solar cost of modules dropped, and about 15 years ago, we started to see the emergence of solar farms on a large scale. So this is one of the, I think it's one of the earlier solar farms in California. And so it's just been going gangbusters with all these big solar projects. Now, I want to point out in these pictures, so I showed one in China just because I thought it captured well this idea that when they're doing this, they don't want any plants, any weeds or grasses to grow up and shade any part of these, because even shading the bottom edge of these solar panels decreases the output from these solar arrays a lot. So in some places, they sterilize that soil. So it's not soil anymore. That's just dirt. It's dead. Nothing is going to grow. They don't want anything to grow there for 40 years for the life of this project. And once that project's life is over, they'll probably rebuild it, and it'll continue to be dead. Forget about ecosystem services. Forget about any wildlife that might cohabit that space. It's done. So is that really the kind of thing we want? Let me go back to this song for a minute. So, is that coming through? This is an ecological nightmare in my book. And right now, some of the buzzwords in ecology and agriculture right now are about regenerative agriculture and soil health. So with this, some states and some jurisdictions, it was scaring them because some of these were taking place on prime agricultural land. They were seeing some of their best agricultural land be given up by farmers who were losing money on their crops because this was more profitable. And so a big problem. Recently, a study in March published by Arizona State University said that more than 100 counties just recently have banned solar farms altogether in their counties. So I have a link to that report if anyone's interested. So dual land use, this is key. This is what it's all about. This is the secret sauce in agrivoltaics to me. So just think about for a minute, what is the intrinsic value of land? Think about how you use land. You probably have a house there, a place to park your car. I've heard that more than 50% of the land area in many central business districts of our big cities like Denver is just parking lots. Is that the kind of environment we want? Does anybody know what the number one crop in the United States is by land area? It's also the most resource intensive. Corn. So no, I'll have to put crop in quotes. It's not really like a commodity crop. Yes. Grass. Our lawns. Our lawns are by far and away the largest crop in the United States. How often do we spend living in the grass in our yards? How much time do we spend other than just maintaining that grass? It's a burden for us. And we do it because it looks nice. But what is the true intrinsic value of that yard, of that land that you're just dumping chemicals on and using lots of energy to mow that grass every week in the summertime? How valuable is that? Could there be a better use for that land? Maybe as for ecosystem services, like for wildlife, for pollinator habitat, things like that. That pollinator habitat as an alternative, that is the true meaning of xeriscape. And the concept of xeriscape was invented in Colorado. You might not know that, but and yet people who want to convert to xeriscape because of the rising cost of water, what they're thinking is, I'm going to hardscape my whole yard. That's zero-scaping, not xeriscaping. That's the opposite of what you want to do because now you've sterilized all that soil, all that land, and the only thing that's going to grow through your gravel are weeds. And probably you put down fabric, nothing's going to grow but weeds. Okay, so I'm kind of getting a little bit behind my timing, so I'll go through the rest of these a little fast. And so I think that's the end of my rants for the most part tonight. So this is what I think is a great agrivoltaics project. This was one we funded a few years ago. This is in Fort Collins. So they have vertical solar arrays between these hoop houses, greenhouses that are covered with a white glazing. And see how bright that light is shining off of the glazing there? It's reflecting light wherever the sun is. It's reflecting onto both sides of those solar panels. And those are producing like 50% more energy than if they were just out in the middle of a field as a vertically aligned solar array. And you can see there's 2 rows. We also funded these solar array on the rooftop. That's their laboratory, and that's where they grow all their... it's actually, when they say laboratory, it means they're growing the sprouts, and then they sell those sprouts. They have to grow them in really clean environments, and they can't allow any kind of viruses or diseases that attack those plants into that. So that's what they specialize in, is just selling the sprouts. But they also, in their hoop houses and the greenhouses in the back, they grow lots of vegetables and flowers and all kinds of things for sale. So some benefits for agrivoltaics. So reduces heat stress to crops and animals, improves health quality and yields of agricultural products, increases soil moisture content, but it's mutually beneficial for the solar as well. The evapotranspiration and the heightened elevation of the modules cools the solar panels so they work more efficiently. And the added solar revenue can give a big boost to farmers who are already economically stressed from low commodity prices. Now, another thing, I learned about this summer. It was published, this was published last April by Arizona State University. They did this study showing that with agrivoltaics on like a typical, so this is kind of, it's not like the dense packed solar arrays that you find in some solar farms. This is 1 megawatt per 6 acres. So it's a little bit spread out. But still, these farms can produce 30 times more energy content than on a per acre basis than corn ethanol. And because EVs are 6 times more efficient, or can be 6 times more efficient than an internal combustion engine, a regular car, you can get 180 miles more of range on the energy produced by solar per acre compared to 1 mile of range that you could get out of the same amount of ethanol produced on that same acre of land. That's an astonishing number to me. So this is a map from that study showing where a lot of the corn ethanol is produced. You can see that there are 3 ethanol plants in northeast Colorado and a significant concentration of corn. This is the field corn, the dent corn, in all eastern half of Colorado and a bit in southwest Colorado as well. This is where I'm going to be a little bit hard on agrivoltaics. So right now, the majority of agrivoltaics is really just conventional solar that's been retrofitted, just tweaked a little bit so that they can put sheep on the land. And basically that allows the sheep to eat all the weeds and the grass, and it allows the owners of the solar array to avoid having to pay somebody to mow that grass and mow those weeds. And so really it's about saving money for the owners of the solar array. So is it more about agrivoltaics, or is that really more about profits? It's kind of a cheat to me. It's gaming the system for agrivoltaics. So these sheep are typically only on the site for a couple of weeks a year. A true, the idea of agrivoltaics really is that you're doing agriculture maybe year-round, or at least through the whole growing season. So not just for a couple of weeks a year. So it makes me uneasy. It bothers me quite a bit. So why isn't agrivoltaics working better than this? Well, there's a host of reasons. First, maybe we just need to give it some time. This is a big transition we're talking about. There is a lot of great work being done at the place formerly called NREL and other places, a lot of universities putting millions and millions of dollars into research, demonstrating a lot of different types of systems. As I showed you in the pictures before, we're not talking about any kind of one-off design. Every kind of agricultural enterprise, whether it's dairies or growing this crop or that crop or greenhouses, you name it, each way of doing agrivoltaics is custom designed to fit the needs of that crop and that agricultural enterprise. And it's not easy. It's very complex. Maybe you have to spend a lot of time looking at the soil types the limited crops that you can adapt to the agrivoltaics system. If you have the wrong kind of irrigation, it's just not even on the table to talk about it, because center pivots, how many of you are familiar with center pivot irrigation? Quite a few of you. Okay, I've got some pictures of what they look like from space coming up. If you have center pivots, you just can't put solar underneath a center pivot. Agrivoltaics is more expensive because there's more infrastructure, more racking costs. And there's barriers between the ag producers and the solar energy, or the solar energy industry. They just don't always see eye to eye. So how do we make it work? Well, we've got to make it much, much easier for farmers. Farmers don't want to be bothered with any of this. You've got to figure out something that's simple and almost like plug and play. It can't get in their way. It can't even get in the way of their schedule, because they're working 18-hour days and they never get days off. They don't get vacations, because if you've got a dairy, every cow has to get milked every 8 hours without any exceptions, period. So it's got to be beneficial to agriculture. It's got to deliver on the promises of increased yields and high return on investment. It's got to be easy to replicate. It just has to be easy all around. And reliable and low risk. Solar should be low risk always. And there has to be easy access to the grid. It's got to serve the farmer's needs as well as local needs. And there has to be utility buy-in as well as social buy-in. You know, there's always the NIMBYism that gets in the way. These are all real barriers to why most agrivoltaics projects are being done as conventional solar farms that are just retrofitted to allow sheep on them. So I'll tell you what I think would work better, that would get buy-in from the utilities, get buy-in from the local communities, serve the communities directly in ways that make a real impact. And so I've got about a dozen or so recommendations. So first of all, we've got to make sure that all the utilities are on board, especially the rural electric utilities, because they are the ones who right now are not allowing any of this agrivoltaics if it's more than about 25 kilowatts, and 25 kilowatts is nothing. We've got to, right now, for almost all the co-ops in Colorado, if it's bigger than 25 kilowatts, they just say, no, it's not permitted. So that has to change, and it has to change soon. But how are we going to do that? Because the Public Utilities Commission and the state government overall has no jurisdiction over the co-ops, because they're co-ops. They're owned by their members, and they make all their own rules. In fact, even the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has almost no jurisdiction over the co-ops. Nobody has jurisdiction over them. They're co-ops, and they were set up that way back in the New Deal. So it's hard. Okay, so we've got to figure that out. And I think one way to do that, let's see. Okay, so another way, this is really key. We've got to prioritize cooperative ownership by the local members of the community and design these as community solar gardens. Why do we do that? Because I've owned solar on my house for over 10 years, and I haven't paid I haven't paid for energy costs in 10 years. I've paid the access fee to the grid because these are set up for net metering. But my total utility bills are like $100 a month, a year rather. Some of my neighbors are paying $300 a month, and it's unbelievable to me. But when you talk about community solar gardens, if the solar garden is owned by the utility, the community members, the the consumers for that utility, the members of that utility, they're usually paying a premium for the privilege to get clean energy from their community solar garden. Why would anyone bother to do that unless they're really eager to just be proud that they're doing something good for the environment? Or if you go join some private community solar garden or solar farm as a subscriber, they promise to save you 5% off your annual energy bills. And usually, in real terms, that translates to like 2 to 3%. So you're paying maybe $2,000 a year if you have a fairly sizable house in utility bills, and you're saving a couple $100 a year. It's not a lot. Not even that. You're saving maybe $100 a year out of $2,000. It's hardly worth it. And nobody is offering anything better than that. Why can't somebody get the same kind of benefit that I get from the solar on my house that eliminates my utility bill altogether? We can maybe do that and possibly promise 30 to 50% annual energy savings for the subscribers if it can be set up as a community cooperative ownership model. And a cooperative ownership model brings access to private capital that isn't otherwise normally available. So, second, and I think this is important but very ambitious. So just like there are housing authorities to help people buy their first home, because buying a house is extremely complicated and it's overwhelming for first-time home buyers. Well, for these solar gardens, setting them up in a community is an enormous challenge. And for people who've never done it before, it seems like an insurmountable challenge to do these projects. Let's create a community solar garden authority that can help communities through that process all over the state. Let's take that burden off of the local communities and give it to somebody who knows what they're doing so that they can do it quickly and get it out of the way and let the community go about its business. So creating a community solar garden authority to oversee all these projects statewide is key. Then next, target the ag land that's peripheral or marginal. And I'll show you some pictures real quickly in a moment. And then finally, target the economically distressed communities and the historically marginalized communities around the state first, and then everyone else next. But these are risky projects. If they're not owned by a utility company, they're owned by the community. What's going to happen if, for some reason, whatever it might be, those projects fail? There has to be some underwriting and some kind of safety net for these projects if for some reason they fail. You might not know this, but the community solar garden concept in the United States started in Colorado. And they were all community-owned projects. They were cooperative projects. That model lasted about 4 years, and then none of them were, they all sold to the utility or some investor, and they all got out of that because they didn't really set it up right, but things have changed a lot since then, and I think we can revisit that, and I think this is really a better model than the ones that are currently offered for consumers. So here's the part on the peripheral, the peripheral lands and the marginal lands. So corners of center pivots. So here we are. This is out just a little bit east of Yuma, Colorado. So these roads are all each 1 mile apart. So each square where those roads surround a box, that's 1 square mile. And so these are center pivot irrigation systems. This is a 1 mile diameter center pivot. There are only a few of those big guys. You don't see those too often. But these smaller ones, those are each 1/4 of a square mile, and there are probably about 15 to 20,000 of those in Colorado, and nationwide there are literally millions of those. And each corner on these small ones, I'll zoom in on this area here. So each corner there is 10 acres. How big is 10 acres? You can put 1.5 megawatts on that. That would serve a small community. On the big ones, there's 40 acres. So on each square mile, it doesn't matter whether there's 4 center pivots or 1 center pivot. All those corners add up to, 160 acres. So you have every square mile of land has 160 acres. Now, let me point out, so where these are kind of bright corners here, that farmer is doing dryland farming there. That's harvested. They're harvesting that land. These corners, that's just sitting there basically neglected. And they're deteriorated probably from neglect, and they just don't do anything with that. That's marginal land. That land isn't much good now for most anything. That's also why they put their houses and their buildings, their farmsteads in those corners. So we have a huge opportunity, almost unlimited opportunity to do these kinds of projects all over the state. So my final comment as I close up here. So if we look beyond agrivoltaics, I think we're missing a lot of opportunities to expand on the dual land use concept. We're missing out on opportunities to apply that for helping people be more comfortable when they're outdoors, in picnic areas, in outdoor shopping areas, wherever there's big, busy sidewalks, maybe not in central business districts between towering skyscrapers, but there are lots of opportunities to be putting solar in places that we're not. And so there are some important questions here, like with agrivoltaics, with the opportunities that it presents, and the problems that occur with conventional solar farms. Does it still make sense to do solar farms anymore at all? Should we make that not legal anymore? Should we ban those? I think if we do that, we're giving ammunition to the people who are opposed to solar for other reasons, and they're going to use that as ammunition to cause problems for all solar. But I think there's an argument to say, let's be cautious about doing any more of these kinds of conventional solar projects where we're paving paradise and putting up a solar farm. That's not the way to be doing this with everything we know today. So let's adapt dual-use land policy for human comfort. And does that mean putting solar on parking lots? Well, keep in mind, these projects have 40-year life cycles, and once that life cycle is up, they'll probably just replace all the modules. And when we're talking about a solar project, we might be talking about a 100-year life of these projects. Do we want all that land taken up by parking lots 100 years from now? We're probably going to go through some major changes where people are not driving their own cars. Maybe they're driving shared autonomous vehicles or something like that. Nobody will even own their own cars. They call it up on their phone and it's there in 5 minutes and it costs them almost nothing. And so we don't need parking lots in that kind of a world. So let's not put solar on parking lots. All right, so I'm going to make a plug for this film that was finished earlier this year. It debuted in Chicago last August, and it's a great film, and it's almost entirely in Colorado about Colorado agrivoltaics and all Colorado people who are making it happen, leading the way for agrivoltaics, and it's free on YouTube. So look it up. I can give you the URL if you want that as well. But that's where I'll stop. Good. So.
Thank you, Sam. That was broad and at the same time specific. We have time for questions, and we'll start with Dave in the back.
Thanks for a great presentation, Sam. A lot of interesting stuff. What about transmission to all these rural areas?
Yes, good question. And so that's a very important issue. And it's been an issue for a long time in Colorado. The Colorado Energy Office has gone through multiple iterations looking at that issue. They did a series of reports around 2007 to 2010, just trying to map out how to give access to the grid to distributed generation all over the state. And then they just finished up a report about 8 months ago on the same topic. And so I think what those reports tell us is they kind of point the way to where we can start, and then where we need to focus resources to upgrade grid resources so that we can expand into the areas that we know need to get these kinds of projects soon. And so it gives us the opportunity to have a plan.
Yeah, I'll just mention something about those center pivots. One of the very first events that we featured here had Mike Bowman, who was at the time from eastern Colorado and a hemp farmer. He talked about those center pivot irrigation systems and how much it costs to run them. Yeah. And I was writing an article about it, and I went back and called him, and I said, "You say it costs $10,000 to $20,000 per year to run one of those? This must be a typo. I must have." No, those are the costs. So the avoided costs, if farmers can run these with those corner-mounted solar installations, can be a financial lifesaver. We had another presenter that I was thinking about today, Rob Billerbeck, who was a convener for all the parties involved in the Colorado River Compact. He's now the chief scientist at the National Park Service at the Grand Canyon. But he said that the problem with all this dryland farming is very low margins, so farmers do go out of business, or they or just abandon the land. What happens when that happens could be a dust bowl situation that not only rivals but vastly surpasses what we experienced in the 1930s, I believe, because as soon as the land falls fallow and isn't replanted with anything that protects it from being blown off by the wind, it's going to be blown off by the wind.
Yeah, I think in 1935, it was November 1935 when Black Sunday occurred. That was the big event of the Dust Bowl, and I think I read statistics that something like 1 million tons of topsoil were lost in that one event just in Colorado. And it was carried all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. So,
a very interesting presentation. Yeah. I have a question for you. Give you a little bit of background. First of all, back in the early 1980s, when after amorphous silicon photovoltaics was discovered. Before then, they didn't even know you could have a photovoltaic effect in amorphous silicon. There were some estimates, especially coming out of Japan, that amorphous silicon was going to beat the pants off of crystalline silicon.
Right.
But that didn't happen, and it's largely because there's just a relentless continuing increase in the efficiency of crystalline solar cells. But today, amorphous silicon doesn't really play very big roles. It's just in niche markets because the efficiency is like 7% compared to over 20% for crystalline silicon. But some of these niche markets are important, and one in particular is an idea that dates back to the early 1980s, is to use very thin layers of amorphous silicon on south-facing windows of office buildings. And that still survives as a niche market. So it's semi-transparent glass that gives you some shading from summer heat and whatnot in commercial buildings. And so I'm wondering if the use of amorphous silicon on some of these greenhouses has been considered in this in your experience.
Yeah, and there are other kinds of other types of solar modules where the solar cells are in transparent glass, and so and they're spaced apart a little bit, so they can let a lot of ambient light come through, or even for a greenhouse, they can provide some of the light requirements for the greenhouse, but still shaded significantly. And I think I've, let's see, I don't know of any specific projects where there are fully translucent solar modules with the translucent amorphous silicon, but I think I've seen pictures. I'm trying to recall whether some pictures that I saw, especially from Japan, whether the solar cells themselves were kind of partially translucent, or if I'm just remembering wrong. So, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned those projects that failed. I actually didn't realize that Colorado was a leader in that area at that time period. You were mentioning the projects, with the private money and the failure there, and that Colorado had been a leader in that. What year did that all transpire, and how can we learn from those failures and make it a success the next time around? Yeah,
so I know, so I've been pretty active in CRES since about 1998, and 2004 was when we passed Amendment 37, which was our original renewable portfolio standard. And there was a lot of activity around these kinds of things. And I know that some of the people that I was campaigning with at the time, I knocked on probably 8,000 or 10,000 doors in neighborhoods all over the state for Amendment 37 because it was a ballot issue. And I was collecting signatures and donations for the campaign. But so there was a lot of activity and a lot of people all coming together from a lot of different communities. And I remember among that community were several people who were leading that effort to create these first community solar gardens at that time. And I think that was in the beginning stages. So it was about probably 2006 or 2007 when the first community solar gardens came online.
A little bit later.
A little bit later?
2010, 2011.
Okay. So yeah, it probably took them 5 or 6 years to get everything together and get those projects, get all the financing and everything, because these are maybe multi-million-dollar projects. So it took some time. So yeah, 2010, 2011. And Yeah.
You mentioned that there's a lot of opportunity with agricultural and the margins, right? And so when we looked at that map of where most of the farmland was, and we look at the map of where large populations are, they aren't quite overlapping. And
Right.
so to your point of we don't want to pave paradise, put up a solar farm, and these projects being 40, 100 years long, are we paving paradise with solar farms when we use half of our land, as you said, for agriculture? Are we still going to be using half of our land for agriculture in 100 years, especially when most of that is animal consumption? And if the goal is to reduce carbon, then that's not very sustainable. So like, is there any prioritization or targeting of farms that are closer to populations or something that we don't necessarily expect to see?
That's a good question. And so the Department of Energy and here at NREL, there's been a group, JCEA, the Joint Institute for Strategic Energy Analysis. So they've been working with USDA and a number of different agencies trying to pool their resources and look at issues like that. And part of that has been looking at kind of containerized or, well, vertical agriculture, which is more indoor agriculture, and like conditioned agriculture in indoor spaces. And looking at those as a trend for the future for a number of reasons. The most important reasons is that there are huge resource savings with water because you can contain the water and keep it recycling instead of outdoors. There's a big water cycle that, you're constantly evaporating water, but you're also getting rainfall. When you're doing that all indoors, then overall there are huge reductions in water use and other chemicals, other inputs. So there's been a lot of work around that, but I just
also a
don't
lot of
know.
disappointment. Yeah. I mean, most of these startups have all failed. Because a lot of these benefits are on paper only, and they don't pencil out once the financing is considered. And I want to wrap it up pretty quickly now, so you can all enjoy the food we've prepared. But there's one thing I want to ask you about, which is how do you finance this? Solar is cheap, everybody says, but in reality, it is all the money up front.
Yes.
And where do you get that money? Is there a financial sector that is set up appropriately to service farmers specifically? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's the part in my recommendations that I really didn't address. So, Colorado had almost $30 million in Solar for All funding that was clawed back even as many of those projects were already built or being built, and the money was spent, and that money was supposed to go toward those projects, and that money was pulled out from under those projects, and those projects are stranded without funds now. That's been a big problem. The governor is suing the administration around that, but the money for my program, my budget is like $300,000 a year.
I wasn't thinking so much about grant monies.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the financial industry giving loans at reasonable conditions to people who want to do agrivoltaics.
Yeah, so there are numerous opportunities, but it's complicated. So we have a green bank in Colorado. It's called the Collective Clean Energy Fund, and I think they had $100 million in backing to underwrite all of their projects. I funded several projects in my home with their loans. That's through the Renew loan, if any of you are familiar with that. available statewide. And anyone can get that, anyone who's a homeowner. And they've financed several projects that I've funded. My grants are paid out at the end of the project, but that means the applicant is carrying the whole cost until the end. And so they stepped in with bridge loans until the grant money came in. And so they provided like $500,000 apiece on a number of projects that I funded.
Then again, I mean, we have sometimes this idealized, romanticized image of farmers in the United States. Of farmers, the ones who don't croak, they're doing pretty well, and they know how to handle money, and they turn over huge amounts of financing every year. So in principle, I would think that the banks they work with now to buy a $600,000 tractor or a $1.5 million combine, they should be there to also finance agrivoltaics or photon farming.
Yeah, so that's a big problem actually. So they know, like, they know combines, they know the different commodity crops, and they know agriculture. There's Ag Credit and CoBank and a few different banks that are really just dedicated to serving farmers, and because farmers do need a lot of capital, a lot of financing, and they get special financing that the rest of us don't have access to at really low rates. That's all subsidized by the government. So, but a problem I've run into quite a few times on the projects that I've funded with grants, their bank says, you said you want money for a solar project? We have no idea how to even estimate the risk of a solar project. And so what's happened is, for example, a 60 kilowatt solar project on a farm to offset their irrigation pumping costs. So that's like a $180,000 project, and it's saving them something like, I don't know, maybe $15,000 a year or $20,000 a year. So that's like, it's not a great payback, but but the bank raised their, so the bank works in collaboration with their insurer, and the insurer said, the bank can't underwrite this, they don't know how to assess your risks, so we're going to triple your insurance rates, and now your insurance goes from like $5,000 to $30,000 a year for their insurance, and that's more than what they were saving from the project. So now that project is no longer, it doesn't make sense anymore. And so there's no system, the rural banks don't understand these projects too well.
And I would argue that this is the point where a rational government would step in, and the Biden administration tried to do just that by creating green banks to step exactly into that role. But what did the Trump regime do? They actually sued green banks under the RICO statute for supposedly being fraudulent and criminals, when everybody can see right away who the real criminals are. So let me just thank Sam Anderson for his service to the community, and I hope to see you all again on January 22nd.